Our next speaker is Ovide Bastien, and here we're talking about international solidarity. We're talking about lessons learned, and this lesson was learned from Chile. Ovide Bastien is an author and an educator. He lived in Chile during the dark years of General Pinochet. Presently, he's managing on a volunteer basis a program. It's a North-South Studies Development Project in Nicaragua. Recently, he published an e-book version of his original print version. The first book, Chile, Le Coup Divin, and the second book, Chile, Underside of the Economic Miracle. Please welcome Ovide Bastien.
I was trained in the seminary to become a priest and a missionary for 8 years. And when I arrived in Chile, in July 1973. That's a few weeks before the military coup. And the events that I experienced on September the 11th changed my life and opened my eyes. All the years at university, the meditations, the studies in philosophy, never taught me what I learned in Chile. Chile had a socialist government elected in 1970, Salvador Allende. And is the sound okay? Loud enough? Okay. Salvador Allende was struggling to rid the country of poverty. I will not provide you very many statistics. Land concentration was extremely high. Less than 4% of the population owned the arable land. Most of it was divided in huge estates. 2% of the 10 million Chileans received 46% of national income, whereas 60% received only 17%. Now, in Chile, you had large copper deposits, and you had big American multinationals exploiting them. And you had about $1.5 million of profits being expatriated every day from Chile. Dr. Salvador Allende, the leader of the Popular Unity government that was elected in 1970, thought it was appropriate to use some of the profits coming from copper to address the problems of the country. What happened is something that I still have trouble, I think I will never accept. What I saw on September the 11th was a coup. The military took over, and the church in which I had believed, 1 week later, I saw the leaders of the Catholic Church attending a ceremony that would broadcast throughout the country on the only TV station to have survived the coup. And I heard Cardinal Enriquez say that he was offering the new government the church's total and disinterested cooperation. At that very moment, I was getting reports of people being tortured, the National Stadium being filled, bodies being dumped in the ocean. I could not believe what I was seeing, and to see the church that I had believed in cooperating in this, I could not believe it. The other big crisis in my life was the Canadian government. I had been a member of the Suco-Cuso Board of Directors for a few years, and I thought that the Canadian government was willing to help out in situations like this. Well, the Canadian government, the Canadian ambassador, Andrew Ross, in Chile, had about 10 people that he had accepted who were trying to escape torture, execution. The French embassy had maybe 300 or 400, packed full. Mexican embassy the same. Canadian embassy, we had 10. I stayed in the Canadian residence of Andrew Ross for a few days, and I saw that he was very happy about the coup. He was very pleased. And it's only through massive demonstrations in Canada, churches, unions, and a very broad mobilization that the Canadian policy was eventually changed. Now, I think that Chile at that time, especially in Quebec, had a lot of sympathy. It was easier to mobilize. I think that Egypt, from that point of view, is facing a much greater challenge. But Chile, from that point of view, was a beautiful example of mobilization. I will not, it was clear that the coup was orchestrated by the CIA in very close collaboration with the Chilean elite. And one could hear Voice of America in the days following the coup. They were saying the same stupidities that the military were saying. 10 dead, you know. And we could hear in other areas, we could see that I could not believe that Voice of America would be doing such a thing. I could not believe that a government could cooperate in teaching people how to torture. And this is obvious. The reporter Jack Anderson revealed already in 1971 that in the days following the election of Salvador Allende, there was a plot to overthrow him. That was in 1970. And there were two Chilean generals who were ready to do the coup right away, and they had been promised a few millions of dollars from the US government. But it was decided that it was best to postpone the coup. I'm referring here to the secret documents of International Telephone and Telegraph, to postpone the coup and to do it in a better way. The better way was the following. You had to make sure that the economy would scream. You had to create instability in the country. You had to blacken Salvador Allende both in the national press and the international press. And if you read the US Senate report on covert actions in Chile, you will see that the El Mercurio, the largest conservative newspaper in Chile, was deeply influenced by the CIA. Not only was it receiving lots of money, but even their editorials were often CIA inspired. A few days before the coup, the Mercurio published the following editorial. It said in Indonesia, there were big problems. And then, what's his name took over? Suharto took over. 500,000 communists were killed. And then there was stability and prosperity. And it was clear that the editorial was suggesting the military to do that. Clear, okay? I don't want to go beyond my time, but I just want to say that in terms of both the US government, my own government, and the church that I belonged in, this was an experience that changed my life.
The resistance got organized.
Oh, I forgot one very important thing that I was supposed to talk about. I was so traumatized that I didn't want to go beyond my time. I'll say a few words about the resistance. After the coup, okay, the people were, of course, traumatized and running for their life. The people were unprepared for this kind of event. And so there's only a small radical leftist party, the MIR, Movimiento de la Izquierda Revolucionaria, that started doing armed actions against the military dictatorship. But eventually, gradually, some members of the Socialist Party and of the Communist Party realized that maybe it was necessary to get involved in arms, and they did, to some extent. That was one thing that had an influence. Another major thing, now the Pinochet dictatorship lasted a full 17 years, and it lasted longer than that, because the 1980 constitution that was adopted during the military dictatorship actually embodied the neoliberal economic policies and excluded radically anything progressive. So that even after the military were gone and you had civil governments, Chile was still ruled by a constitution in which the military still had illegitimate powers and you still had a neoliberal model. Okay? Now, what factors led to the overthrow of the dictatorship? I mentioned one, the armed resistance. A second one are massive protests. Massive protests broke out during the economic crisis in about 1981. There was a very deep economic crisis in Chile, and the unions that had been totally smashed as the political parties following the coup, they organized a national strike that people actually cooperated with. But then the workers were getting fired, the union leaders were getting fired, and people were afraid to lose their job, and they couldn't keep on. But the students took over. The students had no job to lose, and they barged forward. And what the students did in the national strike, it was really the beginning of losing fear. And they lost fear, and then there was a national accord in 1985. This was mediated by a leader of the Catholic Church. I want to mention that the Catholic Church, even though it was complicit in the coup at the beginning, it eventually distanced itself from the dictatorship and then played a key role in helping the persecuted and helping the unions to reorganize and the political parties to reorganize. Now, there was a national accord in 1985, and with this national accord, people in Chile of all political parties, from the left to the center, and even members of the right, got together, set aside their differences, and said, we have to come back to democracy. And that, I think, was a very, very important element that prepared the end of the dictatorship. And I want to mention one last thing. There were massive student demonstrations in Chile from 2011 to 2014. And the students once again led the battle, which broadened to all people in Chile. And what is being questioned now is the neoliberal model itself. And also the fact that people were so silent on human rights for so many years. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much.